With us now is CNN contributor and former chief White House domestic policy advisor under President Carter, Stuart Eizenstat. Thank you for being here. I want to start with what you wrote recently. You wrote in the Washington Post, quote, "Conventional wisdom holds that Jimmy Carter was a failure as a president, redeemed only by his philanthropy and efforts to promote democracy in his post-presidential years. This is palpably wrong." I would love for you to expand on that.
Sure. In effect, Omar, his post-presidency was so remarkable that it eclipsed what he actually accomplished as president. And I think he was the most meaningful, impactful one-term president we've had in modern times. I say that for the following reasons. First, the energy security we enjoy today, the fact that we're the number one producer of oil and natural gas, is due to his deregulation of energy in his presidency. The fact that we are now entering a renewable energy era is due to the fact that he started the whole solar revolution, even putting a solar panel on the roof of the White House. All the ethics legislation, which we have today, was due to Jimmy Carter. He was the education president, creating a new Department of Education, and an environmental president, doubling the size of our national park. And one thing that's often neglected to recognize is his deregulation. Senator Phil Gramm, a conservative senator from Texas, said it very well at his 100th birthday, and that is his deregulation of airlines, which brought air travel to the middle class, of trucks, of rail, of telecommunications, which frankly made CNN possible. Even beer, the craft industry, was all due to him. And here is a Southern president from the deepest part of the Deep South, who was a great civil rights president. He appointed more blacks, Hispanics, and women to the federal bench and to his senior appointments than any of the 38 presidents together. And that it doesn't even touch what he did at home, abroad, with human rights, with normalization with China, with the Panama Canal Treaty, and critically, the first peace between Egypt and Israel, between Israel and its Arab neighbors at Camp David. It is the greatest diplomatic personal achievement of any president in our time.
And Stuart, I want to jump off of a lot of what you said, because you did list a number of his many achievements, and it goes back to sort of the initial framing of the question and what you wrote, and that conventional wisdom says that he failed as a president, and that maybe was made up post-presidency. So I guess the question is, why do you think that so many look at maybe the inflation of the time or the Iran hostage crisis as a basis for remembering his presidency so harshly?
I'll be very frank. When you lose a re-election, you're deemed a failure in our society. He lost re-election for three reasons. I call them the three I's. Inter-party warfare, where Ted Kennedy divided the party by taking him on and didn't reconcile after the convention. Second, inflation, which was heavily due to the Iran crisis because it shut off Iranian oil and doubled oil prices. We had gas lines. But here is, again, a sense of being courageous. July 1979, in the midst of this inflation, Omar, he appoints, over the objection of almost all of us, Paul Volcker to head the Federal Reserve, because Volcker said to him, "I'm going to choke inflation out of the system by high interest rates, and it's going to hit you in your reelection campaign." And he said, "I don't want my legacy to be high inflation. Do what you have to do." And then last, of course, was the Iran hostage crisis. 444 days, which he himself said was the most debilitating part of his presidency. So combine all of those, they overwhelmed all the accomplishments that I've just mentioned.
And, a lot of his accomplishments that people, again, to use your words, under conventional wisdom, do seem to point to, came after his time in office. And I bring that up because you ended that Washington Post op-ed with saying, "He may not deserve a place on Mount Rushmore, but he made our country and our world a better place." So my question to you is, what first comes to mind when you think of him making the world a better place?
What comes to mind is the fact that he planted so many seeds which blossomed later. So, for example, he has a major role to play in the end of the Soviet Union. All the weapon systems which President Reagan implemented, he began. His human rights campaign dramatically changed our relationship with Latin America as did the Panama Canal Treaty, and it undercut the moral argument for the Soviet Union. Camp David was remarkable. Let me give you, please, a quick anecdote. 13th day, after 22 drafts going between Prime Minister Begin and President Sadat, Begin comes to him and says, "Mr. President, I can't make any more compromises. Please get me a limousine and take me away for going back to Jerusalem." And he knows that this will cause the whole thing to collapse. It'll undercut what Sadat did courageously in his own presidency. So what he does is he gets 8 photos made of the 3 leaders together, gets the names of each of Begin's grandchildren, endorses it to peace for each one with Jimmy Carter, hands it to Begin, sees Begin's eyes tear up, his lips quiver. He puts his suitcase down and says, "Mr. President, for my grandchildren, I'll make one last try." And that has brought a peace that has lasted now through everything, including this Gaza war.
Yeah. Stuart Eizenstat, really appreciate the time, perspective, and expertise. Thank you for being here.
Joining me now is my friend and former White House correspondent, Ann Compton. And thank you so much for being with us. I'm excited to talk to you about your time covering former President Carter. What sticks out most to you from that time?
Well, he was such a remarkable change. It really brought an abrupt end to the years of Watergate, Richard Nixon's almost impeachment and his resignation, 2.5 years of Gerald Ford in office. And Jimmy Carter was not a big national figure, but he was part of a very unusual sweep across the South of some very moderate governors, Republican and Democrat, who believed in civil rights. They came from Mississippi and Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia. And Jimmy Carter was the one Time magazine chose to put on its cover, talking about this new sweep, the New South. And from there on, he launched into a presidential campaign and he won.
And his unexpected victory, of course, attributed to his campaign. Why was his campaigning style so successful at that time?
Well, the nation was going through some hard times. You mentioned Vietnam War, which was, they were trying to wind it down, but it was still just a terrible, terrible angst for the country. And inflation was just awful. And there were long gas lines. People were worried and they were anxious. And he seemed to bring a new voice and a kind of a new optimism. And that was appealing. And so his election really turned a major page in American politics.
We've talked a lot today about his time in office, his decades out of office. How do you think his legacy will be defined?
Oh, during the years of covering him, the heaviness of the world situation. He worked from the moment he got to the White House on Middle East peace. He felt it was so important. But you add to that the whole dynamic that eventually led to he spent his first New Year's Eve in Tehran with the Shah of Iran, calling him a pillar of an island of stability. And of course, all that fell apart a year later when the Shah was thrown out and Jimmy Carter offered him eventually a chance to come to the United States for cancer treatment. The whole kind of world blew up in front of him and Americans were taken hostage in Iran. That overshadowed everything for the rest of President Carter's time in office. In fact, the last night he was president, he stayed in the White House Oval Office all night long, dressed in a sweater against the cold, hoping that the deal would come through to release the American hostages. The deal came through, but not until noon the next day when Ronald Reagan took the oath of office, and he was later able to announce that those Americans were coming home. So that heaviness overshadowed many of the domestic things that Jimmy Carter wanted to do. He created the Department of Education. He believed in civil rights and hired women and appointed women judges. And a lot of those accomplishments just were completely overshadowed by the heaviness of the world situation.